Okay, so today we're going to do things slightly different because the easiest way for me to explain consecutive integer problems is for me to show you the PowerPoint that I made on consecutive integer problems. If I didn't already have this PowerPoint, I wouldn't be showing you stuff. But for a lot of the word problems, the important thing is to know what type of word problem it is. And you can always tell a consecutive integer problems because they always have the words consecutive in the problem. It'll tell you if they're talking about consecutive integers, consecutive even integers, or consecutive odd integers, and all those distinctions make a difference. So when you're taking the notes for this particular section and for other sections where I give you PowerPoints, you really do need to make sure you write down all the notes that are in that PowerPoint. But there are problems that are going to be in the PowerPoint that I will use over and over and over again on these slides. So when that happens, all you need to do is cut out that particular problem and tape it onto your paper wherever you want that problem at. So I've sent your mom the file that has those problems on it, and they're the sections that they're the problems that are labeled for section 4.3. I think there are 4 of them for this particular section. So go ahead and have those cut out so that you can have the one that you need for that particular problem up first. And that's the way we'll do for each of these. I think there are 3 different PowerPoint sections in Chapter 4. And some of the other stuff that we did in Chapter 3 I could have done through PowerPoint, but I just didn't remember that I had it until I got to this section. So, all that to say, just this little part. All word problems follow a format, and you just have to learn how to use that particular format. This format is different from a lot of other formats that we're going to go over. It's different from perimeter formats. It's different from distance formats. This one has a specific pattern that you have to memorize. You'll know that you need to use this pattern because they're going to give you the word consecutive in your problem. They always have the word consecutive in the problem, and they'll also say what kind of consecutive it is. So if they don't specify whether it's even or odd, then you know it's consecutive integers. But otherwise, they will specify even or odd. Consecutive means the numbers have to go one behind another. So when we're talking about consecutive numbers, we want to pull numbers that are one behind another. So if we're talking about consecutive integers, we're going to pull numbers that are one behind another, like 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Those are all consecutive because they're right in a row, one behind another. If I were to say, let's let x equal 3, don't write this down. I'll get to what's important to write down in a minute. Just watch for right now. If I were to say we're going to let x equal 3, then how do we get to 4? What can I write that would give me 4? If x is equal to 3, what do I write to get me to 4? And you would say, well, x plus 1 gets you to 4. Okay, well then how do I get to 5? What would get me to 5? Well, x plus 2 gets you to 5. What would get me to 6? X plus 3 gets you to 6, because we know that x is equal to 3. So x plus 3 is like 3 plus 3, which is 6. And what would get me to 7? Well, x plus 4 gets you to 7, so forth and so on. Keeps on going. Well, let's talk about consecutive odd integers. What are some examples of odd integers? Well, 3 is a good odd integer, which means my consecutive integers would be 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11, because these are odd numbers. Okay, that's all fine and good. Let's go back to our original thing. If I were to let x equal 3, how do I get to 5? Well, we talked about it over here as x plus 2. That's how you get to 5. Well, how do I get to 7? Well, we talked about it over here. It's x plus 4, because 3 plus 4 is 7. Well, how do I get to 9? Well, x plus 6 is 9. How do I get to 11? X plus 8 is 11. Okay, so forth and so on. What about consecutive even integers? Let's talk about some even numbers like 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. When I'm talking about these numbers, if I were to say let's let x equal 2, how do I get to 4? Well, you have to add 2 to 4 in order, 2 to 2 in order to get to 4, so it would be x plus 2. And how do I get to 6? Well, x plus 4. And how do I get to 8? X plus 6. And how do I get to 10? X plus 8, so forth and so on. These are the patterns that you have to have memorized. These are the things that you need to write down. What's in green can change. What's in purple never changes. So it's the stuff in purple that I need you to write down and remember, not the stuff that's in green. So go ahead and take some time and pause the video so that you can write these down. Then I want you to think and tell me what you notice. So I hope what you noticed was that, wait a minute, this and this are the exact same list. So in reality, there are only 2 lists you need to know about. You need to know about the consecutive integers list, where it goes by 1, 2, 3, 4, and you need to know about consecutive odd or even integers, where it goes by 2, 4, 6, 8. Now, because you know these patterns are always the patterns we're going to use whenever they bring up a consecutive integer, no matter what numbers it happens to be. So now let's look at a problem. So the first problem we're going to look at is this one. The sum of 3 consecutive integers is 279. What are the integers? So find that little slip of paper that you cut out that says that and tape that in your notes where you're at so you don't have to write this problem out every time I go through it. Okay? So the sum of 3 consecutive integers. So my question to you is, are we talking about even integers or odd integers? Well, it doesn't say which one we're talking about. So since it doesn't say, that means we're talking about regular old consecutive integers. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull out my consecutive integers list. So this is what we wrote down for consecutive integers. So now, how many consecutive integers are we talking about? Well, they say the sum of 3 consecutive integers. So I need to start by labeling my 3 consecutive integers. So my first number, we're going to label x, because it's the first in the list. My second number gets x plus 1, because it's the second in the list. My third number gets x plus 2, because it's the third in the list. I'm not trying to make this difficult. If they had asked about 4, I'd pull the first 4 numbers. If they had asked about 2, I'd pull the first 2 numbers. If they had asked about 6, I'd pull the first 6 numbers. That's why there was a little dot, dot, dot behind it. So these are the ones that we're talking about, and you need to make sure you label them every single time, because eventually it's really going to be important that you label them carefully. So we have our first number, our second number, and our third number. Now, they say that the sum of these integers is 279. So I should be able to write an equation now, because sum means that we add them up. So I should be able to add up my first integer and my second integer and my third integer to get 279. Now my students always want to know at this point, is it important that we put the little parentheses around it? No, I was just showing my first integer and my second integer and my third integer so that you could see that they were all there. So that's my first, my second, and my third integer, and it has to equal 279. Now that I have an equation, I can go about solving it. So when I want to solve this equation, the first thing I need to do, just like we did the past 2 days, is draw my line. I know you didn't think there was going to be one there, did you? Tricked you. So I drew my line. Then I need to go through and get rid of my parentheses, which was easy enough. Combine like terms, which I did. So x plus x plus x gives me 3x, and 1 plus 2 is 3. Now I move my letter from this side. Ain't got no letter on this side, so I can move my number on this side. So I need to subtract 3 from both sides. That gives me 3x is equal to 276, and then I divide both sides by 3. So I get that x is equal to 92. Now, here's the real conundrum. That is not your answer. x equals to 92, where'd my pointer go? X equals 92 is great, and it is correct. There's nothing wrong about that, but that's not what they asked us for. What they asked us for is what the integers are. So they don't want to just the x equal to 92. They want to know what the first integer is, and the second integer, and the third integer. So my first one is 92 because it was x. My second one has to be the next one, which is 93, and my third one has to be the next one, which is 94. Those are my answers. Make sure you get all three. Your turn. This is your chance to make it good. This is the sum of 3 consecutive even integers is 42. What are the integers? So you need to go ahead and type your little problem in. And keep in mind that they're talking about even integers. What list do we need to use for even integers? That's correct. We got to use the consecutive even integers list. So go ahead and pause the tape and see how you do with just setting up the problem. That's all I want you to do is set up the equation. Don't want you to solve it yet. So when you go to set up your equation, I hope you wrote down that the first number is going to be x, the second number is going to be x plus 2, and the third number is going to be x plus 4. Then for your equation, I hope you have x plus 2 plus x plus 4 equals 42. Now that we know that that's what the equation is, now you need to pause the tape so that you can solve the equation. Okay, so draw my line. Combine like terms on the left-hand side gives me 3x plus 6 is equal to 42. Subtracting 6 from both sides, I get 3x equals 36. Divide both sides by 3. X is equal to 12. That's not your answer. So you got to plug it back into the stuff at the top. So 12 is your first number, your second number is 14, and your third number is 16. Those are your answers. Let's look at a more difficult one. Oh, this one isn't more difficult. The sum of 3 consecutive odd integers is 339. What are the integers? Let's see if you can do this whole problem. Not just set it up, but set it up and solve it. Okay, I hope you use the odd integers list, which means your first number is x, second number is x plus 2, and third number is x plus 4, and that's the equation you should have. I hope you drew the line and got 3x plus 6 is equal to 339. Subtracting 6 and dividing by 3, you get x is equal to 111, which means your first, second, and third numbers are 111, 113, and 115. Ta-da! Look at that. You know, not everybody gets this kind of treatment, I'm just saying. Okay, so now let's look at a more difficult one. It's still a consecutive integer problem because they use the words consecutive odd integers. So now that you know that they're talking about consecutive odd integers, we need to start with our consecutive odd integer list. So they told me that there were 2 consecutive odd integers, so I knew I was going to have a lesser one and a greater one. I didn't call them first and second. You notice that? I called it lesser and greater, and I called it lesser and greater because they called it lesser and greater. Whatever they call it is what you need to call it. So since they said lesser and greater, that's what I called them. My lesser one has to be the first one, and my greater one has to be the second one. So it says twice the lesser of 2 consecutive odd integers decreased by the greater integer is 53. What are the integers? So when I'm going to set up my equation, I have to do twice the lesser, so that's 2 times this x. So that's how I got the 2x. Decreased means we're going to be subtracting the greater integer. So when I subtract this greater integer, I'm not just subtracting x plus 2. I have to subtract the whole thing because it's all one integer. So I have to put those parentheses in there so I can separate it. If it was a plus, the parentheses wouldn't be as important. But because it's a minus, you have to make sure you put the parentheses around that number. And that has to equal my 53. And then they want to know what the integers are. Now that we know what the equation is, go ahead and try to solve it real quick. Okay, so I draw my line. Get 2x minus x minus 2 is equal to 53. That gives me x minus 2 equals 53. Add 2 to both sides. X is equal to 55, which means my lesser number is 55 and my greater number is 57. One more really difficult one. And I'm showing you this one more really difficult one because some of the ones in your book are just this difficult. So you might want to take extra special care with this one so that you can write it exactly like I do. It says find 3 consecutive even integers whose sum is 4 more than twice the next even integer. So my first question is, are they consecutive even, consecutive odd, or just consecutive? And the answer is they're consecutive even integers. So that means we need to pull from our consecutive even list. And how many integers are we talking about? It says find 3 consecutive even integers. So I have to list my first, my second, and my third, but I also need to list the next one because they talk about the next one. So they want us to find the first 3 whose sum is 4 more than twice the next one. So when I'm setting this up, it says find 3 consecutive even integers whose sum, so that means I have to add them up, is, that's my equal sign, 4 more, so that's 4 plus 2 times whatever my next integer is. So my equation is the sum of the first one, the second one, the third one has to equal 4 more than twice the next one. Now that you know what the equation is, you can go ahead and set it up. This is why we list them out. This is why we go through the trouble of writing down what our first, second, third, and next is. Because if we don't list them out, we don't know which ones to multiply by stuff down here. Okay? So I draw my line, combine like terms on the left-hand side, gives me 3x plus 6. On the right-hand side, get rid of my parentheses, so I got 4 plus 2x plus 12. Combining like terms on the right-hand side, you get 16 plus 2x. Have to subtract 2x from both sides. That gives me x plus 6 equals 16. Subtract 6, you get x is equal to 10. Now I can go back and plug it in up here. So since we know that x is 10, that means x plus 2 is 12, x plus 4 is 14, x plus 6 is 16. But not all those were what they asked for. Always go back to what they ask for. They want you to find 3 consecutive even integers. So our answer is the first 3, because that's what they were looking for, not the next one. Okay, so we did a lot of work today. It was long, it was hard, it was arduous, but you've really got to make sure you get the consecutive stuff down. So there's some classwork and there's some homework. And the classwork is pretty simple because I want to make sure that you're getting your equations correct. the homework gets a little more difficult. So what I'm going to do is underneath the classwork, I've actually set up so that I went ahead and wrote down the equations for each of the homework problems as well, so I can make sure you've gotten those equations down. So when you go to do your classwork and your homework, make sure that you go ahead and set up your problems in your homework and go back and check and make sure. Don't do them at the same time, but go back and check and make sure that you've got the setup correct for each one before you go on to solve it, because I hate for you to get the wrong equation but then solve the equation right and then get the problem wrong and not know what was wrong with it. Okay, the classwork for this section is on page 146. It's the practice exercises 1 through 11 odd. And then the homework is the same problem, same page, numbers 13, 15, 17, 19, and 27. And I will see you tomorrow. We don't talk about mixture problems tomorrow. That comes later on. Bye.